Can everyone hear me? I'm having a little bit of trouble with my mute button, but that's great. Hello, everybody. It's nice to see you all. I hope you enjoyed the hold music. It's an attempt to figure out how to do it for the first time properly without the distortion. So welcome. I'm going to turn that off shortly. I hope you had lovely weeks and you're enjoying, if you're in the UK or other parts of the world, that you're enjoying some newfound freedoms recently. Here we go. Give me a second to get organised. Talk amongst yourselves briefly. I'm going to try and find I've lost a window here, so I'm having a bit of a challenge to find it. Give me a sec. There we go. All right. Thank you for coming. So I think we've got about 100 or so people so far, and I'm sure a few more will join as we get going. If you get any issues with audio, you can message the group and let us know, but hopefully it's working, and we'll get into it. Now, some of you might have come to these before. We've done, I think, this is the 6th we've done since the lockdown began in the UK, and we've been really enjoying doing them, actually, and seeing some of the faces from week to week is a real pleasure, actually, to reconnect with you. Has everyone got a soft drink or something to enjoy, or even a hard drink? I'm having water today. I might move on to a special birthday low alcohol beer. Who knows where it'll go after that. So look, this is called the distance resistance, and I guess it's pretty obvious why it's called that. We decided that right at the beginning that we were apart and we were going to stay apart, but that didn't mean we couldn't come together and have a bit of fun and inspiration after work online together, or at lunchtime if you're in the US. Hi Barbara, glad to see you again. And we've run these against since the second week of the lockdown, and they've gone good, actually. We've got more and more people coming along, and I've really enjoyed the questions that you've asked and the follow-ups and discussions. So I love hearing from you. We all love hearing from you. So please do kind of get stuck in as we go along, and I'll explain a bit more about how that works. So hopefully you're ready to engage into an engaging chat for the next hour or so. But it is supposed to be fun and relaxed. So hopefully we can find an opportunity to have a bit of a laugh as we go along and smile a bit. So let me know. First things, though, the deal tonight. So I'm going to introduce in a moment 3 amazing speakers to you, and I've got some questions to ask them, some of which you guys helped put together, and I've got some more questions which I'm sure you will want to throw in as well. We'll come to that, but the plan is that we'll have a conversation with these guys, and then if you want to ask a question, we'll ask you to either raise your hand in the chat box, or you can even post your question in there, and then we can get into addressing some of the themes. I will say that we are recording this event, so it allows other people who couldn't make it to see it afterwards. But it does mean if you come on screen, unless you hide your video, your face will be potentially recorded. So just so you know. And I must, as always, give a special shout out to my friend Nick Bennett from Hyper Island, who is been my technical mentor and general remote working kind of guru in the last couple of months. Has been helping us out to make sure these go smoothly. So thank you, Nick, for doing that. So tonight's theme is how to build a better normal. Within about 2 days of reading the phrase "a new normal," everyone started telling me how sick of it they were as a thought. And I think there's nothing great about normal generally, frankly. And I don't know about you, but I don't particularly want to go back to normal. As I watched the gradual return of traffic on the streets of London, you can witness it, it did make me realise that we might be very unwittingly walking straight back into the old world, and let's not agree that the old world was perfect, without even really being able to stop it happening. So that's my one sort of personal observation of the day, really. According to Sky News, about only 9% of people want to return to normal after the lockdown. And maybe normal was broken, and I think there's a once in a lifetime opportunity, isn't there, for us to do something a bit different, really, and to seize it both in our lives, in the way that our families work and our friendships work, in the way that we work, in the way that our economy works and society works, and really our attitude to the whole world. So that is the challenge that we have, really. But is there any consensus on what a better normal might actually look like, and how can any one person make a difference? I mean, is it not just too big for anyone to actually deal with? And I think that's a fair challenge, really. I'm going to give you a little framework because, it'd be a shame to not have an opportunity to mention Grey Consulting, that wonderful little enterprise. And I'm going to show you one little thing which might be helpful. And I've turned it into one slide of very few words. But I think I'm trying to find a way to help people think through what it might be like to, if I can get it to work, to think about how you might design for a new normal. Now, I'm not going to give you the content. You guys will work that out yourselves in the conversations this evening. But these questions might be useful to you. So if I can get them working, I will do it right now. So give me a sec. 5 R's, we call it. Can you see that? And I'll send this round afterwards in an email follow-up. But I think as we go through the conversation tonight, there are probably 5 R's that you could use to think about how we build to a better normal for yourself. What are you going to remember in a positive way? What are you going to retain as a habit? What are you going to replicate and do more broadly? What are you going to remove in the future? And what are you going to recruit? So what are you going to bring in now? With thanks to my wonderful colleague, Rich Giddings, who helped pull this together a few weeks ago. And I'll share that in an email tomorrow so you can see it as well. But I wanted to give you like something to kind of help, I don't know, help structure some of the ways that we might take action on the back of this. So hopefully you're cool with that. Right, I've talked too much already, as always, but I'm now going to introduce our wonderful speakers to you in the order in which they will speak. And I'll do a mini intro, and then I'll ask them to do their own intro, and they'll do a much better job, I'm sure, than I will. So first of all, we have Anna Hyde, who traded a successful career as a sales and marketing director, and I think had worked in the media for a long time, for a life of activism now with Extinction Rebellion. So I know most of you in the UK will have heard of Extinction Rebellion, but if you're from other places around the world, you might not know that they are an international movement that uses non-violent civil disobedience to halt mass extinction and the kind of climate change that we seem to be marching towards inexorably. And she's also been a presenter, I think, on XR's, or Extinction Rebellion's, Rebel Radio. So should be no stranger to this world. So I'll bring Anna on in a minute. We also have Dr. Daniel Butt. I don't know if you can see Dr. Daniel, who is joining us from Oxford this evening. Daniel is Associate Professor of Political Theory, a Fellow and Tutor in Politics at Balliol College in Oxford, who focuses on international politics, colonialism, egalitarianism, the ethics of cultural property, and the environmental ethics, should be quite interesting. And he's also been on BBC Radio 4 recently. So I'm looking forward to hearing from Daniel. And finally, and not least, Bruce Daisley, who I don't know quite how I met Bruce many years ago, but someone that you never forget meeting. And I think listening to Bruce's podcast, Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat, that many of you will have listened and tuned into, was really instructive and helpful on my, often on my journey to work, actually, Bruce. And that kind of makes sense, I suppose. And he's recently written a book about a year ago, published in the UK, called The Joy of Work. And I think it came out in the US about a month or two ago. So #1 best-selling author, Bruce Daisley, and we'll be coming on in a minute. But Anna, does the fact that you don't have a journey to work mean that the space in your life is gone? It's true. I'm not listening to Spotify anymore. I think it's sad, really. Well, I am on this show, but anyway, it's like, 1 track a week. Right, Anna, I'm gonna ask you to be our first speaker. Hopefully I can unmute you and I can hear you.
Yep.
Anna,
can you hear me now?
Brilliant. How was my introduction, Anna? Did I do a good job of introducing you?
You did a very good job. That was brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, hello, I'm Anna. Yes, what can I say? I joined Extinction Rebellion a year ago. I went to Parliament Square on the day that Parliament announced the climate emergency. I thought I'll go down and see what's happening here. This is quite interesting. And when Parliament announced a climate emergency, I thought this works. I'm hanging out with these guys know what they're doing. And it was dead simple because they've got 3 demands: tell the truth, act now, and for a citizens' assembly. It's very simple. And then they've got 10 values. And once you've got that, you're in the gang. It's really easy to do. So obviously people have heard about us. We've done lots of different things. We've done a couple of rebellions now. But our response to the COVID crisis has been quite an interesting time for us all. And I was wondering, Leo, I've got a bit of a film. Would you mind just playing that film? That I thought might be a useful introduction.
Let me just get this working. I'm sure it's fine. Sometimes I have a little bit of trouble with my full screen, but this should do it. Here we go. Hopefully you guys can see that, and I've got the audio set right. We'll just check. If the audio isn't right, well, one of you tell me and I'll get on it.
Okay, it's not happening yet.
Here we go.
Here we go.
Don't know whether you can control it, Nick, if I get it wrong, but hopefully it'll work.
I'm sorry to tell you, but staying home doesn't make us heroes. We know you were hyped about being one, becoming one, but we're definitely not. It's time to understand we're dealing with a new kind of virus. COVID-19 is perverse, Machiavellian, because it's making us believe that if we stay home for a few weeks, we're saving the world. But that's not going to happen. And every government and enterprise knows that.
Here in our app, so you can be a true couch.
Of course, we do have to stay home. We do have to work from home. We also have to wash our hands constantly. That's not what it takes to be a hero. Because if we go back to normal, we're facing big trouble.
Devastating fires in Austin. Tourists are seeking shelter now.
Wait, that doesn't mean we have to stop chanting and clapping at our balconies for those who risk their lives for us. Thank you all for that. But if we don't change our behavior, we need to know this is only the first of many viruses to come. We need to demand for global scale change, and it needs to be done today. Stop animal industrialization, which multiplies the spread of zoonotic diseases. Stop poisoning us with agrotoxins. Stop rescuing big corporations, and stop hiding the truth from us. Accomplishing that seems impossible, but it isn't. Let's put life in the center of the equation. Because if we do that, only then will we become true heroes.
Okay, so there's a little cheery film for you to get you in the mood for saving the planet. So, I mean, I guess in a way, what the COVID crisis has done for Extinction Rebellion is get people to pause and think. It hasn't done more than that. It's just given people a bit of time to have a look at what might be different. And it's great that this talk is happening with all of you people today, because everybody's starting to think of what could we do differently. And in fact, with Extinction Rebellion, we've launched a kind of two-sided campaign. In Extinction Rebellion, we all sign off our emails love and rage, okay, because those are the two things. It's our love for the planet and our rage at the system that drives us on. So we've got this campaign starting that is Winds of Change, which is the love part, which will show you all the visionary things of where we could go, how we could make a better world. And then No Going Back, which is all the shit that we don't want to bring with us, all the bad stuff. And I think Arundhati Roy really coined it. I don't know if everybody's seen that quote, where she said the COVID crisis is like a portal, and we have to leave the past behind and bring the things that we love into the future. So what are those things? Well, you know, there's two really big myths that I think are that if we bust these, that's the source of everything. It's the starting point. And they kind of go together, and they're like the central pillars of capitalism, really. And the one thing that I will say is in Extinction Rebellion, the climate and ecological emergency is merely a symptom of a bigger problem, which is our global capitalism. So the first question that I want you to ask yourselves, you don't have to answer it to me, although if you can give me a good answer, then you might stop me being an activist forever, because I really puzzle with this one, which is, how does it work, this idea of infinite growth, right? So all business is predicated on growth, infinite growth, in a world of finite resources. So how does that even stack up? How can we even start to process that? So have a little chew on that, because I've been chewing on that for a year and I still can't get the answer. And then the other one, which I think we've kind of busted, even Rishi Sunak's got this one, right? Which is this idea that wealth trickles down. Well, that's a load of bollocks, isn't it? I mean, we really proved that in the last financial crisis. We poured all this money in the top with quantitative easing. And even I, you know, in 2009, went, yeah, that seems like a fairly good idea. Let's put some money in the economy and watch it trickle down. Well, it didn't, did it? It trickled into the revenues of luxury yacht manufacturers and pretty much nobody else. So even Rishi's managed to understand that at this stage and has kind of worked out that you can put some money in the bottom and it might percolate up. Not entirely, because he's still bailing out all sorts of ridiculous fossil fuels and airlines and stuff. But that question of how can we have infinite growth on a planet of finite resources has to be the basis of everything going forward. If we can stop thinking about how we measure things and start thinking about better things to measure, everything we measure is GDP, even the contribution of universities, which is crackers. So that's kind of my starting point. And I can see from Leo's face, I'm whiffling. So
that's good. It's good. I was going to ask you a question about that, which is, and this is the core of it, isn't it? I suppose, really. But how does that? What does Extinction Rebellion think about the balance between getting the recovery, turning it into a green recovery or a Green New Deal? I think is the language that I've heard people use, and I'm not an expert in it, but I've heard people talk about it. Would they be prepared to do that at the cost of people having jobs? Because I guess there's a view, and I heard Nigel Lawson, who was an old, for those of you who aren't British, he was an old Chancellor of the Exchequer, the head of the Treasury, effectively, who was saying that we just need to get it all going again and make sure there's as much money moving as possible and just get the wheels turning. How does Extinction Rebellion feel or find its way through a balance like that between, on the one hand, green recovery and the other hand, people having jobs?
Well, I mean, yeah, people are going to have to retrain because there's lots of different jobs coming up in the future. Things like the Green New Deal have some aspects that we think are marvellous, but even so, people are still using the phrase green growth. And I think the ultimate thing is what you measure, how you make, and in our society at the moment, everything is measured by GDP.
Yeah.
And there's a great webinar that happened on Tuesday. A group called Positive Money launched a report called The Tragedy of Growth. And in this webinar, you had Caroline Lucas, Clive Lewis, Guy Standing and Lord Deben, all discussing what we should be measuring as well as or instead of GDP. So we should be measuring well-being. We should be measuring regeneration, circular economy. Because at the moment, what we've done with our world is, my mum always has this phrase, when I can't find anything, she says in a sanctimonious manner, matter is neither made nor destroyed, Anna. Go and find it. And the truth is, matter is neither made nor destroyed. And what we've done is taken all the carbon out the ground, released half of it into the air, and made the other half of it plastic, and put it in the oceans. So that's all there. So what we've got to start doing is thinking about a more circular economy and measuring other things. Let's put life at the center of our measurements instead of wealth.
So tell me, one of the things I was really fascinated to know is, and I guess this has been something that all of us, including Extinction Rebellion, have been wrestling with in the last 8 weeks or so, but is how has the COVID crisis really changed the minds and attitudes of the people at Extinction Rebellion? If you can say that, if you can ask that question.
Well, I think people are still absorbing it like they are everywhere. I mean, our big thing before the COVID crisis was the kind of tell the truth, because this extinction is coming towards us like a juggernaut. Right, and lots of people don't believe that, and they don't believe the science, and they want to cling on to denial. I think the one thing that COVID has done, it's stopped the world, it's stopped the economy. We don't know if the economy will survive, quite frankly. So it's done quite a lot of our fear for us. Okay, the fear is there. And also it's shown the world that when it is an actual emergency, which the climate and ecological crisis is, we can pull together and sort something out.
Yeah, that's interesting. So does that give you more hope than you had, the end of last year?
I don't know if it gives me more hope, because there are two sides, aren't there? Like totalitarian governments can take a lot more control over a system when people are in a panic system like this. The other thing is that, after the last financial crisis, things didn't get better for anybody. They got considerably worse. The gap between rich and poor has really widened in the last 10 years. It's not something that's just been ongoing at the same rate. It has accelerated massively. So it could still go either way, but with the no going back and the winds of change, I think that we can show some of the visions of what might be different. And I think sometimes people at the moment might have time to listen and think about it.
Yeah, I like that. I was going to ask you really about precisely that. Like, are there companies or cities or people, or maybe the first two, that you think are doing, who sort of show us the way, that would be stories we could celebrate and say, okay, I understand there is an alternative. It is workable. I could do that too.
Oh, well, there's really exciting things happening. I mean, you know, Kate Rayworth, who will be a colleague of Daniel Butt's over there, with her donut economics, the city of Amsterdam has taken that on, the city of Philadelphia, and also Costa Rica has taken it on as a national thing. Yeah. The revolutionary thing about Kate Rayworth's economics is that we have to live within our planetary boundaries. Okay, and this is a very new concept relatively in economics, because it's always been about the capital and the people and all this kind of stuff, but never had the box around it of the planetary boundaries. So that is very exciting place to be. There are 9 planetary boundaries, if anybody's interested, and I can put you a link on them. And if you think of the planet as a Petri dish, right? The 9 planetary boundaries are the circumstances that mean that life can exist. I don't mean human life, I just mean any life, right? And at the moment, we have transgressed 3.5, maybe 4 of those boundaries. So we're on pretty thin ice, not to make a pun. But if we can look at that and look at ourselves within our planetary boundaries and work out how we can make a life and an economy that lives within those boundaries while still catering for all the people, that is how we can move forward. And that's some of the most exciting thinking around. And really exciting is the fact that Amsterdam took it on 3 weeks ago. They're totally reorganizing their whole way of local government so that they can make it happen. It's very exciting stuff.
One thing I noticed I did have a look in preparation for this. I'd heard of donut economics, but I'm by no means an expert, but I had a look at it. And there's some excellent, I just sent a link, and there's some great videos you can all watch on YouTube, which make it really simple. What I didn't get was the middle circle was about social needs, it was balancing people's social needs for us as individuals and the planet's needs, and finding how to get them in harmony, right? That's the broad theme, isn't it? And what was missing in the middle was there was no sort of, it was all good stuff around justice and equality and fairness, and I think that's nothing wrong with that, of course. Didn't seem to have like an element of like people enjoying themselves or fun. That's my only observation. I don't know if you've noticed that. It's very, humans are people who like to have fun too, and we know that after the lockdown, but there must be some way you can harmonize having fun and doing right by the planet. I don't know what they are, but anyway, I just thought it was an interesting observation.
I think it depends. You know, I don't see many economics textbooks that kind of budget fun, quite frankly. You have to make your own fucking fun wherever you are, really.
Cleanly, I think is the point, really. So I'm gonna ask, I guess, one more question, and then we'll come back to you at the end for sure, because there's a whole lot more we could talk about, and these things sort of fly by, really. But I guess if you wanted us to remember a couple of things about this experience we're having now, and about what it feels like to be in lockdown and the nature of crisis, and and then learn from them next, what would you like us to take away from our experience of being locked in, locked down, the pandemic?
I think the biggest thing is it's given everybody time to have a little think about what they value. Okay, so think about what you've valued in this time, and it's different for everybody because everybody has different circumstances. And then think about going back. Like when I used to go on long holidays, because I used to get 3 weeks off when I worked in media, and I used to come back to my desk and I'd feel like a stranger, and I'd be like, ooh, what did I used to do here? I can't even remember. So when you go back, or if you go back to that life, just think about, is this really the best way I can spend my life? Is this really the very best thing I could be doing? There's this meme that went round on I don't know, one of the social medias, And it was designed up horribly, you know, like a Vietnamese hippie thing. It was just disgusting. You wouldn't really want to read it. But the story was really good. And the story is the fisherman and the capitalist. So the fisherman's having a lie around. He's done his fishing for the morning. He's having a fag or whatever he's doing. And the capitalist comes along to him and says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm having a rest." He said, "Well, why?" He said, "I've got enough fish." And he said, "Well, why don't you go out and get a load more fish?" He said, "Well, why would I do that?" And he said, "Well, then, because then you could get another boat, and then you could have 2 boats, and then you could get even more fish, and then you could have a whole fleet of boats, right? And then, and the fisherman goes, "Well, why would I want to do all that?" And the capitalist goes, "So that then you can retire and lie around." And the fisherman goes, "What do you think I'm doing now?" And I think that story is really relevant for everybody who's been busting their nuts. Yeah. Right, on the hamster wheel, working their tits off. And I'd be interested to know what Bruce thinks about that.
We'll definitely get onto that. I think we've all felt that there's something in the slowing down that is positive. Thank you, Anna. That's brilliant. And there's a lot more to talk about, and we'll come back to you in a little moment. And I want to bring Daniel. I'm going to bring you in next if you're there. I'm going to try and you should be unmuted. So
hi, Leo. Yes, good to see you.
So Daniel, tell us a little bit about who you are. I don't know if I did your intro justice. You know, there was a justice being an operative word. Whether I did it right by you in the introduction. How would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I like what you did there with justice. That was clever. Good. Yeah. So I teach political theory. One way to think about that is that, well, in academia, we think that we divide studying politics into 2 halves, maybe. One's political science. That's more about what's actually going on. So studying legislatures and executives and, you know, parliaments, that kind of thing. And one is political theory. And one way of thinking about that is that it's about how things should be and about how we might change things. So if we're thinking about a new normal, you might think that political theory is the place to look. And so what I work on is, as you said, questions of justice, social justice, economic justice, environmental, global. What they all have in common is that they're all about how society and the world are structured, how people do well or don't do so well, and about how we treat each other.
Very good. So I'm going to ask you straight off the bat then, Daniel. So, or is it Dr. Dan? What do people call you?
Dan, let's go with Dan.
Doctor. Given what we've heard from Anna and Extinction Rebellion, and they've been extremely successful in many ways in the UK and really raising our consciousness, and I'm very grateful to them for that, and I think it's changing my attitudes and feelings, but it also scares me, and it probably does with many people, and I guess that's the balance. You must have thought about this a little bit. How do you feel about the sort of worldview that Extinction Rebellion is putting out? What sort of trade-offs are involved, do you think, and is it realistic?
Well, I think that one of the interesting things about the last few weeks is that our sense of what's realistic has changed quite a lot. I mean, I think that if you think about the way that people were talking about climate change, you know, a few months ago, when people talked about realism in relation to Extinction Rebellion, there was always this sense that we were sat on a capitalist bus that was kind of out of control. Yeah. And then we could see that things were going wrong, but there wasn't really much we could do about it for a whole bunch of reasons, because we were tied into certain kind of consumerist patterns, because people were pursuing their own self-interest. They didn't want to make big sacrifices because they liked traveling, because they liked consumption, and also for sort of deeper structural reasons as well, because single state governments couldn't really do very much. You needed to have international organizations that don't exist, all those kinds of things. So there was a sense that we were slow walking towards a disaster. We could see that something really bad was going to happen, but there was nothing we could do about that. Well, I think a lot of those assumptions have been challenged now, right? I mean, people have seen that their ways of life can shift very quickly. They can get used to doing different things in different ways, that they can have different attitudes to consumption, and also that maybe governments can do things that we didn't think a little while ago that governments were able to do.
So it has definitely changed our sense of the role of government and key workers and everything else besides it. So I guess that's beginning to evolve or create a new story about how the world might be in our heads. And I've got a question that I'm sort of interested to put to you, partly because I came across this on a podcast, the TED podcast on the BBC Sounds app, if anyone wants it, from that famous historian and futurist and author Yuval Noah Harari that everyone seems to have read a bit of or come across a bit of what he talks about. And one of the things that he said is that the challenge of the modern world is we don't all share a common narrative of how we think the world works, what we think our role in it is, and that's kind of causing dysfunction and problems for us. So he, I think, argued that until kind of 2008 or so, the sort of neoliberal view of the world, the story about how the world works, was dominant, and then it kind of collapsed and nothing came back since then, and kind of crazy populists have jumped into the gap. Do you think there is a compelling story being told anywhere of what a better normal could be? How near to it are we?
Okay, so I think what I'm going to give you now is an optimistic spin. Okay, so we're looking for some hope. We're meant to be having fun. You said that. So here's the optimistic version. I think that you can tell a story whereby what's happened over the last few weeks is that people in the UK, but not just in the UK, in lots of countries, have come to a different understanding of how the economy works, how society fits together. And I think that there's a sense that we are, all of us, much more dependent on each other than we realized before. And that many people in the economy and society are doing things that we took for granted and that are actually critically important to our well-being and the well-being of people that we love. And the hope is that that could be a model for a different kind of understanding of how society works, a different kind of social cooperation and organization. I mean, the dominant sensation, surely, when people go out and clap on Thursday evening, is a sense of gratitude, right? It's a sense that in some ways is mirrored with a sense of helplessness, that an awful lot of people who are stuck at home are aware that there's very little they can do at the moment, and that others are out there, in many cases, putting themselves in the way of harm in order to keep things going, in order to keep us literally alive. And so I think you could use that as the platform for thinking about ways in which we're interconnected, ways in which people are making contributions to society that we didn't really understand before, and that there could be some kind of a settlement after this, that we would need to rework society to recognize that kind of contribution. Now, there were 2 occasions in the 20th century in Britain where people had that kind of sense. And they were after the 2 world wars, when soldiers, not just soldiers, came back, people had made contributions on the home front, and twice there was a sense that something needed to be done, that we couldn't just go back to the way things were before. After the First World War, that didn't work. This Lloyd George's claim we'd have a land fit for heroes, and instead we got mass unemployment, and people suffered a great deal. And so there was this determination after the Second World War that things would be different, determination on both sides of the spectrum. And then, of course, we get the Attlee government, we get the welfare state, we get housing, and we get the NHS. So I think that if you have a different understanding of how we fit together, how it's not just a market system that gives us an idea of what people contribute to society, but that there's a much deeper and meshed form of social cooperation going on, then that can be the basis for a refounding of society.
So I do find that optimistic, and it sort of appeals to my wish and my dream, and I'm sure it does for many people on the Zoom with us. But do you think the crisis is actually deep enough and long enough to generate enough? I tell you why I say that. I was in driving, unfortunately, today, and I looked around, and I've never seen so many cars in 2 months. So I can see life is starting again. I guess you might say, Nigel Lawson, the economist, or the former chancellor, would say, well, that's great. Things are starting again. The wheels are turning, literally. But I wonder if 6 to 8 to 12 weeks, or maybe even slightly longer, is long enough to generate enough of a break with the past. What do you feel?
I don't know, and none of us know, I guess. It's not a world war; it's different, and we don't know how long it's going to last. But if we listen to the things that Anna was saying, we might well think that if you don't like this emergency, don't you worry, because there's another one coming along pretty damn quick. And, this could be a dry run in many ways for all kinds of really harmful processes which are going to evolve in the future. So maybe the answer to that is combining all the stuff that we've seen about the pandemic with a forward-looking orientation about what's about to happen in relation to the climate.
Yeah, well, I hope you're right. I was going to ask you that, one of the kind of key questions here is how to build a better normal. And I'm trying to understand the balance between what I or we as individuals can do practically, as workers, as individuals, as family people, or whatever, versus what governments can do, or organizations and corporates can do. Where do you, I don't know whether you can answer this question simply on a Zoom call, but you know, who's in charge of setting a better normal? Is it us or is it them?
Well, guess what? It's both. Who'd have thought that was going to come, right? But I mean, I think, let me say two things. I mean, one thing is that for years, I think we've been thinking that one of the problems we've got is that states can do much less than we thought they used to be able to do. People talk about what's known as the hollowing out of the state. So instead you have multinational corporations who exercise an awful lot of power. The state devolves its responsibilities to other actors. People can move around the world to avoid tax regimes, so it can't really tax, it can't really spend, its control is limited, and there's just not a lot it can do. Well, I think that, you know, what we've seen in the last few weeks is a resurgence in many countries, not just the UK, of significant state power. And it looks as if the state, if it wants to, actually can effectively nationalize. It can take responsibility for all kinds of payments. So maybe the state's bigger than we thought. So perhaps that opens up windows of opportunities that we didn't realize were there. But I also think that it's undoubtedly the case, in particular if we look towards the climate things that Anna is talking about, that even if states can do a certain amount, they can't do everything. One of the features of, if you like, pollution, of environmental harms, is that they cause externalities, that they cause harms that aren't necessarily going to be experienced by the people who cause the problems, who give rise to the pollution in the first place. And that's one of the problems, of course, that we face with climate change. I mean, you're sometimes told a story that climate change is a problem for everyone and it's going to affect us all equally. And of course, that's not really true. It's going to affect poor people much more than rich people. It's going to affect poor countries much more than rich countries. And so there is a dystopian story you can tell about the future, whereby rich countries put up the barriers, they stop people coming in, and they try to, as it were, ride it out while the rest of the world burns. Now, if we're going to avert that kind of thing, I don't think that even state action is going to be sufficient. What we're going to need to have is a much wider ethos amongst the citizens of the world. Now, I don't mean by that that they do a bit of recycling and that kind of thing. What I mean by that is that they're deeply committed to structural change that can tackle these problems. And that's going to have to pervade, you know, all areas of life. And that calls for a very active citizenry of a certain kind.
Oh, I like that, the sound of that. I think I like it. I think it might be quite difficult and lots of sacrifice involved as well. So I guess I'm a bit... Is there something, you know, this must have changed your view this last few weeks and months. This must have changed. Is it changing what you're teaching? Has it changed your perspective much? I mean, how is it... Are you able to kind of come to a conclusion already about what it's like?
I mean, genuinely, I think there's something exciting about it. There's something terrifying about it, of course, but there's something exciting. I think it's opened up a range of possibilities to us politically that we maybe didn't think we have. Now, I mean, you know, of course, as I said, this is the optimistic version. There are versions you can give of this that go to a dark place. But I think that what it means is that there's going to be space for political mobilization and an array of possibilities open to political actors that weren't there before. So that's not to say everything's going to work. It's going to take work if things are going to improve. But I think there's conceptual and political space there for people to do things that wasn't so obvious, put it that way, before. So I think at the very least there's a positive spin you can put on it. And it certainly made me challenge assumptions I had about the inevitability of what was going to happen in the next few years.
Yeah, I think that in creation of space is really fascinating, actually. I'd love to... We could do this for 2 or 3 hours, but I'm not sure we'd hold on to the whole audience. So tell me, I'm going to ask you one last question, then perhaps we can bring you back in again at the end, Daniel, a bit. But
sure.
What would you like us all to remember from this experience?
I mean, people often don't like Oxford academics telling them what to do, so I'm not going to tell you what you should remember. But I'm going to tell you what I'm going to try to remember, I think. And it relates to what I said earlier. And it's a feeling of vulnerability. It's a feeling of understanding how once this broke, I was sat in my house in Oxford and my mum is sat on her own in a house 60 miles away and I can't get to her and there's nothing I can do to help her. And I'm entirely dependent on other people to make sure she's okay and to make sure that I'm okay as well. And that, you know, that was a feeling I hadn't really experienced in that kind of a way. And that came as a shock to me. And I think that kind of emotional response is potentially powerful. I think that a lot of people will have felt vulnerable who didn't before, who maybe should have before. maybe it's a sense of understanding of privilege, maybe it's a sense of understanding how society fits together. But I think there's an emotion there that's something that we can build upon.
Thank you very much. Okay, a sense of vulnerability. I will hold on to that. Okay then, Bruce, are you ready? You up for a chat?
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything that sort of struck you particularly, that anything resonated strongly with you from?
Yeah, well, you mentioned yourself that you wonder if this is going to be enough. And firstly, I have to salute your optimism that you believe that we're past the worst of it, because certainly there's nothing remotely that makes me believe that we've not got 2 or 3 more peaks to go. But maybe we are. Maybe we will be snugly tucked in at our desks in the next few weeks. I was really struck with one thing that someone said to me earlier today. He said that we used to have 1,500 people coming into this building every day, and it's a big media publication. He said we used to have 1,500 people coming in every day. We've had 30 come in for the last 8 weeks, and the product is identical. And for everything that we might tell ourselves that things are going to go back to the way they were before, it's unequivocal that anyone looking at the bottom line of that will say, right, we were doing some things out of tradition and emotion that probably we can get rid of. And here's the thing: Google pulled out of 2 million square feet of property in the Bay Area. These big organizations, the chief exec of Morgan Stanley said just last week, he said he's done a 180. He realizes we don't need a physical footprint. And I think what we're witnessing before our eyes is something transforming. The interesting thing is it's becoming unpicked week to week. And it's one of those incremental things where we're not witnessing what's happening because we're so befuddled with so much else going on. These, we've got this existential threat of, are we going to die? We've got the challenges of dealing. Hell is other people, and we're realizing that includes our housemates, family, and children. And we're all in this situation where everyone is pleading with us to be more productive, and we're struggling to get more done. But aside from that, we're going to be in a situation where we're looking at the fact that the offices that we previously had already, half of US multinationals had said at the start of this year they were planning to go to hot desks.
Right.
Don't believe a word of it from now on. Martin Sorrell said 2 weeks ago, he said, I spend £35 million, about $45 million on property. He said, I can spend that on wages from now on. Well, I love the spin on it, but I can't imagine that Sir Martin is going to be reaching to expand people's pay packets. So we're in a situation now where I think, unfortunately, we've demonstrated that some of the things we were hanging on to before were probably emotional attachments. No doubt there are some things that we definitely get a lot of energy from being around other people. That coffee bar scenario, that, working in a coffee bar, even if you need to focus, can be immensely energizing. So there's no doubt that we as humans need to be in a tribe. But I think the way we recharge and get the benefits of a tribe will probably be constructed in a different way.
And so that's something I've been fascinated by, because that sort of conviviality is a word that it's an over poncy word, but basically that feeling of not necessarily being with your mates, but being in a place where people are having fun and coming together, like, frankly, a British pub, has totally gone at the moment. And I'm really aware that work offers a lot of that to us as well, which is sort of what we're getting at. Do you think, can you sort of envisage in your head what future work might look like then?
I think more than anything, and there's some questions coming in, how will we maintain culture? I'm really interested in anyone who's on Twitter. The last couple of tweets I've done a sort of link to articles talking about these things. But I'm really interested in the companies who are the underculture, the subculture. We used to see sort of these extremes where culture was formed, and there are a number of organizations that for the last few years have operated with no offices. So let's look at one of them. One of them is Automatic. They're the people who run WordPress. Maybe you didn't realize, but about a quarter of all the websites in the world are run on WordPress. They have no offices. They have no offices at all. And so what happens is I did a blog post on this a couple of weeks ago. What happens is that they have developed different ways of working. They recognize that the first thing we do when we go remote is we substitute what used to happen in the office with exactly the same but remote. And the strange thing is, it doesn't work as well. There's some benefit in seeing the big boss by the lift. There's some benefit in chatting to someone by the coffee machines. So actually, if we're just going to do the same, it doesn't work. However, the one thing he said that was really instructive, he said, we ask employees, they can work from anywhere they want in the world, whatever time zone, wherever they want to do. He said, we ask employees to commit to give 4 weeks a year for team and meetups. Right. And that's really interesting, because I think what we've done at the moment is that we've recognized that there are benefits that being around other people. We are recharged by other humans, but what we do is we get it in really small doses. And what they say is, look, plan for this with your childcare plans, plan for this when you're thinking about your responsibilities and your vacations, but we want you to commit 4 weeks. Some is going to be really small team bonding, but some of it is going to be corporate. But we want to re-energize the team, reconnect them in these very intentional events. And I think, if the idea is culture is created in the undercultures, the subcultures that sort of then become the mainstream things, I think looking into what companies like Automatic do can give us a perspective on the direction we're traveling in.
That's really interesting. I can't wait to see more of that. I'll dig into them a bit more. I was going to ask you, and I've sort of asked this to our other guests as well tonight, but you wrote The Joy of Work, I guess, more than a year ago, the initial draft of it that you've maybe been writing it for a while, I guess, but that before you published it. How would you change that now, given what you've seen and witnessed the last 8, 9, 10 weeks?
Yeah, no doubt we've seen more disruption than ever before. The sort of joy of work, I largely how I got into this was that I was working in a tech firm. I've spent sort of over a decade working in Google and Twitter. And what really struck me as an outsider going in was that these organizations didn't necessarily have culture more fixed than anyone else. And so despite that, we set about trying to build a wonderful culture. And along the way, it took a couple of missed turns. And I was really interested, is there an instructional guide how to fix these things? I found myself delving into workplace psychology, into sociology, all manner of things. And what you discover very quickly is, number one, some of the issues that present themselves to work, and almost the first half of the book, are about burnout, or about exhaustion, about people sort of optimizing to work longer than they did a decade ago. And, not only are we working 2 hours longer than we did a decade ago, the server logs that are being gathered, there was an article a couple of days ago, the server logs that are being gathered right now suggest that people are working more now than they were locked down in the office. So we're on this road to burnout. We're on this road to everyone feeling like there's no separation between work life and home life. And the fascinating thing is that when we look into people who are productive, creative, inventive, the mavericks, they tend to have outside interests. And yet we're just eliminating any cognitive capacity for us to do that. So a lot of the things I talked about there, I think still stand true. The thing that I felt that was the superpower for teams and individuals, whether we are introverts or extroverts, was that human beings derive some measurable and demonstrable energy from being around other people. When we're in sync with other people, it seems to have this energizing effect on us. And you can see really interesting examples of it. You can see if you put athletes exercising next to each other, they exercise more by being next to each other. You put people in a choir, get them to sing ABBA songs, and their pleasure hormones go through the roof. So just feeling connected to other people can have a really positive benefit. And one application of that, then, I saw the editor-in-chief of the HuffPost. She tweeted about 3 weeks ago. She said, we've worked out that our new normal is that if we have a meeting on the calendar at 11:30 on Monday morning, where all we do is we talk about the TV we watched over the weekend, we seem to forge that connection that we've lost by, most people working in their 20s and 30s aren't working from home offices. They're sitting on their bed, and, working on your bed can feel deeply isolating. And that bit of human connection was the bit that I was most passionate about in my book. And I think we're all working out ways to try and recreate that.
Yeah, and it's happening, I guess, instinctively, and maybe we can speed up. And I'll come back at the end, perhaps, Bruce. We'll talk a bit more specifically about some kind of top tips and suggestions you might want to give us. How do you feel about this? I mean, there's obviously you can't sort of solve the problem of a green recovery, or a world where we're not destroying the climate, we're living within planetary boundaries without thinking about the economics, and you can't think about the economics without thinking about work culture. I mean, where do you see the kind of intersection of working practices, or the health of the planet, the health of our economy, and the health of our ways of working? Do you think about that connection much?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the average Londoner has a 74-minute commute. It's the longest commute in Europe. It's significantly smaller than some in the US, but it's the longest commute, and obviously that has an environmental impact. So us working in more measurable way and more sustainable way is clearly good for the planet. Someone at the side here was saying, well, what about business rates? But no one, this media owner that I'm talking about here is not going to be thinking about their business rates bill. They want to keep paying their business rates, so they're going to sustain an office. When disruption happens, none of us sit there thinking, oh my goodness, that means my tax bill will go down and society suffers. All of us are trying to build businesses the best we can. We need then the system thinking to say, okay, this is the consequence of that. How can we adapt to it? The one thing that's clear from the demise of the high street is that the business rates for high street businesses are clearly wrong. So I think us looking at the things we want to preserve, saying, well, we therefore must be conservative for the sake of preserving them, it's probably the wrong way to do this. Probably we need to be in a situation where we recognize, look, one good thing that could come out of this, unequivocally, one of the things I tweeted was this wonderful Medium post. And a woman goes, if anyone doubts that the office culture has just taken like a massive shock, they should read the aggregation of information that the journalist wrote. And the one thing that's really clear from that is that demand for real estate is about to tumble in big city locations. Barclays CEO said this week, he said, maybe the idea of bringing 7,000 people to an office every day is deeply outdated. Anyone who doesn't believe that these things are going to have a massive impact, because why? Because the CFO is going to be looking at it, seeing we're in one of the biggest depressions probably of our lifetime. Where do I save money? I save money on this luxury that's sitting idle. That is precisely what's going to happen. What's going to be the consequence of that? Well, a second disruption is that the biggest tenant in London, the biggest tenant in New York is WeWork. WeWork announced yesterday they collected 80% of their rents in April. And, goodness knows if the lockdown in California looks like it's got at least 3 more months on it. Who's to say how long the lockdown will go on everywhere else? Can't guarantee that the biggest tenant will be collecting their rents, and they're already on the verge of bankruptcy. So anyone who doubts this disruption is probably just presuming that we will revert to an equilibrium. What's the upside of this? Well, at the moment, we're in a situation where property in London costs 12 times salary. It's completely inequitable. The whole idea through history was that cities had mavericks, artists, inventors. London, Paris, New York has no longer got space for those people. If we see a massive collapse of the commercial property market, maybe this is the one opportunity for young people to get themselves on the property ladder as we try and migrate our city spaces to something closer to sustainable residential.
Yeah, I think so. We're going to see a lot of office chic, office reworking, office remaking.
Absolutely.
Coming up. I think it's true. Moving into the centre of London now might be relatively easy. I'm fascinated to see if it goes that way. What I was going to ask you about, I suppose, is I read someone who'd reviewed your book. Actually, it was on the Amazon site, and they said they were talking about how this book was a very interesting way, an important way for people who might have sort of fallen into a bit of a rut in their work life. I don't know if you've seen that review. There's lots and lots of reviews there, but I was wondering, and hopefully this is a fair question for you, but this is an opportunity for a bit of a reset for lots of people. What do you think would be the killer question people should be asking themselves to take advantage of that?
Yeah, I think, a lot of us have found right now that the experience, as I said before, the experience of substituting meetings for Zoom calls, spending, the average British person spends 16 hours a week in meetings. I've yet to meet this average person, because the most people I talk to say, oh yeah, it's more than that for me. Yeah. And I chatted to one friend a few weeks ago, and he said, I've spent about 30 hours on Zoom calls this week. And this is extraordinary because it's, we used to talk about presenteeism, the idea that when we can't measure what people do, the very fact that we can see their clean faces is a good substitute. And, we have this situation that often presents itself to us that, just summoning people to listen to what the boss is saying feels like a good way to measure what's going on. And of course, it's deeply unproductive. If you're sitting there staring into the boss's face, then very much it prevents you 2 days a week. It's preventing you from actually getting work done. And I think for a lot of us, increasingly we'll be thinking, number one, some of the norms we understand cities at the moment are markets for employees. We move to a city for jobs. We move and increasingly the companies, again, looking at the subculture, the companies that operate this long term, they interview and hire people without ever meeting them face to face. I think it's going to be a cultural leap for a lot of us. But, if people are finding themselves working from remote locations and maybe just getting together for 2 or 3 weeks a year, then it's going to become a norm for a lot of us. And so then consequently, some of these applicants, firstly, what's our route to find talent when it's in the Outer Hebrides, when it's in Scotland, when it's in Ireland? What are the tax implications for that? I can't begin to imagine. Twitter announced yesterday that all employees can now work from home whenever they want, forever. And so, I have no idea of the tax implications of working in different states, in different countries. So all of these things are going to have a big impact on how companies work. But, a question is going to be when top talent goes for an interview, people are going to say, can you talk me through what my burden of video calls is going to be a week? Can you talk me through the experience? And very resolutely, we've got systems like Glassdoor that tell us the experience of working in different companies. It's going to be companies thinking about how they can manage the employee experience. So it's not them just merely sitting on their sofa doing hours and hours of video calls.
I think that's brilliant. One thing you really made me realize, I don't know, I'm going to ask you a very personal question, not that personal, Bruce, it's kind of professional, personal. We could go that'd be the kind of after Zoom party. But you've obviously found a way, and maybe it's because you've been taking time to write your book, but you're thinking through quite a few steps ahead about what the world might be like in 6 months' time or 12 months' time. I can see it in the way that you're talking. How are you doing that?
Yeah, I think more than anything, I like you. I like everyone. I love the energy of being in the office and laughing. For me, I used to say resolutely, my favorite part of my job was laughing every day.
Yeah.
And so what's the thing I miss now? I miss the fact I don't laugh every day. Nonsense. I miss it. I grieve it. It's like there's an absence inside me. But that won't be the thing that determines what the shape of work looks like. And I think, we need to be honest. There used to be a little rule of thumb that was, when someone was working out the cost of running a business, it would be 90% wages, 9% rent, and 1% bills. And, it's like really simple heuristic when you're sort of looking at costs. And resolutely now, every company, every CFO is going to be looking at that saying we can save that 9%.
Yeah.
And how low we can get it down. Maybe we're going to get some wonderful showroom that's got big meeting spaces to get people together once and twice a year, or just somewhere to pitch to clients. But we're going to change our relationship with space. And I think the critical thing is that, we're not going back to work next week, Leah. We're not going back to work next month. And, more than anything, my favorite thing in the world is the Olympic Games. I think we're going to look at the idea that we move the Olympic Games for a year as a feat of immense optimism. And so, like the idea that somehow normalcy is going to return very quickly, I think is, unfortunately, it's a cognitive error. It's a cognitive mistake we're making.
Yeah,
we revert to equilibrium. And actually, that's not the case. And the big disruptions of big property no longer being appealing, this going on for probably longer than we would like to imagine. When we all left, a lot of us didn't clear our desks. A lot of us sort of wandered out thinking, I'll be back on Monday. If not Monday, 2 weeks. Yeah. I left a bowl of fruit. There's things going on where I think, we're reverting to thinking this is short term. The thing I wrote today was, office culture as we know it is gone. And the question is how quick you're ready to rebuild something new. Because we need to think, one of the things that works okay in offices is big teams. If you're in a team of 100 people, you can make it work.
Yeah.
It doesn't work on Zoom calls. It doesn't work when you've got projects to work on. You know, if you can get people into, the small little structures, they can be far more nimble. They can be far more sort of productive doing it.
I think that's really fascinating. I could go on, but I'm going to allow our wonderful Zoom participants tonight to chuck some questions in. So the way this works, guys, is you can ask questions of any of our speakers or all of them. What I'd like you to do is type a question in the side, or you can write, "I have a question," and we'll try and pop you on video. It's nice to get some other faces of some of the guys watching tonight up there. Who's got a question? Is office culture nuked in Sweden? I don't know if I can answer that. Stephen, let's have you, since I know I've been trying to get you on this for a while. Now I've got you. Are you ready to come on screen, Stephen? Nick, can you do that, do you think? He's on it. Stephen, are you there?
Yes.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Yeah.
Very optimistic.
No,
Daniel.
this is very pessimistic. I will not see anything like this year. Guys, one of the things that I, as an absolute pessimist, think is when I keep hearing that things are going to change and that office culture will change. I believe what will drive that is probably more likely that a lot of bosses are seeing how much money they've suddenly started saving by possibly not having offices and physical spaces, and working from home actually might save an awful lot of money and when revenue is harder to come by. Do you think that will be more prevalent, even short term or longer term, as part of culture? And what lessons do you think have been learned in that respect? That's for anyone willing to take it.
Yeah, I've unmuted you all, I think, hopefully. Go on, somebody. Go, Anna.
I would say saving money by having people working at home is going to be the least of everyone's problems. Sorry to tell you this, but we're on the verge of economic collapse. Nobody's buying anything. Nobody's making anything. Nobody's got any money. We are going to have to go to ground zero and start building up. And Bruce, to come back to you, I really agree, because my favourite thing about going to work was having the laughs and joking around.
Yeah.
But what I will say, I don't know if anybody else has done this, in my street, when it's the NHS night, we all stand at the end of our kind of steps and have a drink. And through mutual aid groups and through streets, we've started to have that kind of humour that's not with your best friends, but it's with the people that you operate with, where the banter comes from, let's put it that way. And so that I think people will always find that, but they just might not be finding it in the office. You'll be finding it somewhere else. So whether it's in your local shop, whether it's in your local street, whether it's in your mutual aid group, wherever.
Mm.
Yeah, but I do agree with Stephen that a lot of these decisions probably will be driven by financial expediency. And that's the critical thing. So, you know, if I read something about a big multinational had moved it to its new office, and the horror of last year was that hot desks were becoming the norm. So, you know, anyone who works, this is broadly an advertising group, but anyone who works in advertising will know that firstly, their desk got smaller, and then people started suggesting that rather than a desk, they could have a locker, and they could be welcomed into the world of hot desking. And we were resolutely heading in that direction. Big impacts of that, again, are younger workers. We used to learn, you know, industries without training, development, we used to learn by resting on the knee of the elders of the community. We used to hear someone else negotiating and learn from them. And obviously those things when you've got hot desks disappear. So there's a lot lost in these situations. What you discover, there's a really interesting organization spun out of MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology in the US. a team from their media lab created these people meters, and very interesting technology, simple tracking device that tracks you in an office with permission. It tracks what goes on. And what they discovered is that a lot of what's accomplished in an office is brought about by face-to-face chat. It is the chat on the way to the loo. It is the chat as you're picking up a sandwich that seems to provoke little interactions between us. But what they discovered is when people went remote, their interactions went down by 90%. So if you presume that, I see Stephen by the lift, I say to him, I'm thinking, that idea, not sure about that, mate, actually, in hindsight. I don't see him in this new world. And so I think I'm just going to leave it. Stephen launches his campaign and it's a spectacular failure. And I could have just resolved that with my little chit chat in the old school office. So, we do lose something when we go to these smaller worlds. And it's the consequence of us being in these unwieldy, vast teams at times.
What do you make of your old bosses, though, saying staff don't have to come back if they want?
I think what often happens when people go to that environment is they observed, hot desks are exactly the same. People observe, they say, something feels different. We've sort of lost something, there's sort of the mojo that we had, the humor that we exchanged, the camaraderie, the call that, that Huffington Post put in to talk about TV. We sort of lost it, and work becomes maybe productive, but deeply isolated. And, I think a lot of organizations that go to just working remotely, look, if you do it well, then it can allow people to work from a far wider range of places. It can be a way to regenerate the whole country. But if you do it badly, people can feel isolated. The sad tragedies of work is that 42% of British people feel that they don't have a single friend at work. And I can guarantee that number will only go up if we go to a complete remote world.
Mm-hmm. Should we give room to another? I don't know whether Dan, you want to answer this one, or you want to have some other questions?
Another question.
Go on. Has anyone else got another question? Who'd like to ask a question? Has anyone got a little hand up? If not, I've got some lined up, but I'd love you to do it. Who's got one for me? Wangu, you had one. Do you want to ask it? Can you find Wangu Chafua somewhere on there, Nick? You got him? Wangu, you're going to be on.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hello, mate. How are you?
Hi, yeah, I'm really well, thank you. It's a really interesting conversation. I think I just had a thought about the sort of like social inequalities of Zoom as a utility. I've read stuff about children using like novel Zoom backgrounds as a way of hiding like the financial imbalance in a classroom. And I don't think we've actually stopped to think about the emotional impact of inviting your office into workplace. This has sort of been answered a bit beforehand, but I think there should be a little bit of privacy at home, really, and sometimes people want to hide things from their home. Is it fair to immediately assume that everyone wants to be recorded in their personal space, and especially somewhere like in London, where a lot of people are living in one room? Is it fair to invite your employer into that space?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll answer that. I was on something last week. I couldn't agree more. I mean, one of the hidden aspect of this is that it's so economically stratifying that, I was on a panel similar to this last week with a professor from London Business School. And she said, well, we're now in the stage, week 6, week 7, where we've all got our home office sorted. And I my feeling was, it's so remarkable that privilege often forgets the privilege that it exists in. And, the idea, I saw the chief executive of, I think it was the Barclays chief executive, who said, actually he was finding it all very agreeable. So I suspect, being able to wear the same clothes he wears for golf while working probably feels deeply agreeable in his home office. But many of us just don't have that situation. Now, look, the truth of it is that if remote working allowed us to work from depressed areas around the country and to bring business to them and to bring good jobs to those places, then actually there can be a force for good in this. But broadly, there's a model. Nielsen said that they would like their workers to come in 2 days a week for meetings, and then work from home for the rest of the day. And what that means is that if you're a worker in your 20s or 30s without property, that you've got the need to be close to urban centres. You need to still do the commute 2 days a week, but in addition, you need to find housemates you're willing to work around in the house. It's a worst possible world. So, you know, I agree with you. This is economically stratifying. It's as it stands, it's going to make work worse.
I was going to ask Daniel, because I heard the trigger word of fairness, Daniel. I don't know if this is one you want to weigh in on, if you have a point of view on what Wangu asked us.
Well, I mean, it's something which is very evident in universities at the moment, because, of course, our students aren't here, our staff aren't here, everyone's doing everything from home. And there's certainly been discussion, I know, in the media as well, about the way in which students have suddenly encountered each other's home lives in a way that's been a shock. And, you know, you've got some people stuck in a corner of a 2-bedroom flat attempting to do some work with 4 or 5 other people in the background. You got someone else somewhere rather nice outside on a table on their parents' estate. You've also got a situation where you've got the tenured professors sitting quite gleefully with their MacBook Pros, as I am doing, and all the administrators are sort of holding up a cracked mobile phone attempting to get on by with that. So I think there's deep questions of underlying inequality in an awful lot of that. And certainly in terms of my interaction with my students, I think it's come as a shock to some of them, experiencing the very different kind of home environments that they're coming from.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to have a go on that, Anna, or if you want to ask another question. Should we ask another one?
I just want to say one thing, which is 14 million people in this country live in poverty. Now, I know that's a party pooper, and I know that most of the people here aren't in that 14 million. That's a fucking lot of people, isn't it, for the 6th wealthiest nation in the world? Just popping that in. So when we're talking about inequality, Zoom meetings is the least of the problems, to be honest. What about those people who are on the streets who haven't even got anywhere to live, never mind a room to have their Zooms?
Yeah, not perhaps approaching it in a deep enough way. Does anyone else want to ask another question?
Can I ask Daniel a question?
Yes, please do.
And so, Daniel, I should have read up about this before, but our third demand is for citizens' assemblies and for upgraded democracy. And I'd be really interested in your perspective on how effective you think those things are.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the answer is we don't have very many working models of citizens' assemblies yet, so we don't really know, and we don't really have good examples of them scaled up in a big way. But if you look at the sort of some of the examples in a smaller micro way, they seem effective in terms of the level of debate you get, in terms of the legitimacy which the participants think that the outcomes have. And there are some examples. Iceland's really interesting. If you look at Iceland and what happened in Iceland following the crash, because obviously Iceland was deeply affected, and you basically had a citizens' uprising against the government in many ways, and sort of a takeover and a sort of a period of constitutional renewal. And so I think that what we've seen in various places shows that where there's space for people to get involved in this kind of, mini publics and citizens' assemblies and those kinds of things, they can be effective, and people can think that the outcomes of them are legitimate. Now, of course, one thing to think about in the UK at the moment, there's a word we haven't mentioned so far, thank Christ, but I'm afraid I'm going to mention it, and that's Brexit. And what we're going to have is a constitutional vacuum, really, if we get through this, and once Brexit happens. And there's going to be a gap there, I think, a gap in terms of legislation that affects people, and we're going to have to make a lot of policies, but also a gap in how we govern ourselves. So I think there's a window of opportunity that you can look at new forms of political engagement, like citizens' assemblies, like mini publics, and think that time maybe has come. The combination of Brexit, of growing awareness of climate change, and the growth of these kinds of democratic innovations, you can see a road forward there whereby people could try to think that those are mechanisms that could fill that gap.
Interesting. I'm gonna, if you're okay, I know we're slightly running over 7 o'clock, and hopefully the fact that there's still so many of you still on the call suggests you're enjoying it and finding it interesting. I think what I'd like to do is I'm going to ask you three wonderful guest speakers, and I appreciate your flexibility and adaptability to the questions that have come in tonight and the flow of the conversation. And I've really enjoyed it. And I'm going to try and do a tiny sum up in a minute. But before that, I'm going to ask you to think about a question. And the question is going to be, given that the theme was how to build a new normal, I nicked it from a Caitlin Moran book title, which is How to Build a Girl, in case anyone's interested. How to build a new normal. I'd like you to come up with, and I'll sum up so you can have some thinking time. What would be your one action you would like us to take away so that we can build a new normal? One action each. I know it's really painful because there's 10, 20 things we could cover, but right, what's the killer action we should take to build a new normal? So, and whilst you're thinking about that, I'll do a tiny summary for people. And this, by the way, is also very helpful for us when we come to writing this up, which we'll do in a follow-up email. This recording will be available to those of you that want it afterwards as well. I guess we heard first from Anna, brilliantly and clearly and fairly with the cool film from Extinction Rebellion. But I think my takeaway from our chats with Anna, I'm sure most of you will agree, was we are needing to get deeper on the question of our addiction to growth and what that really means, and what it would mean to be able to have a happy life and still live within planetary boundaries. And that question is not going away, it's getting louder and louder and louder. And I think it was Dan maybe who talked about that, or maybe it was Dan, but this is a dry run potentially what we're getting for something else that's coming, and a lot of people talk about that. So that's kind of fascinating. I think I like the way that Anna, you talked about this is a chance to put life rather than GDP or production at the heart of things again, and that people need to retrain. And I think you talked about jobs, but really also we need to retrain our minds and our attitudes a little bit, really. And that retrain theme, I think, is a big part of building for a better normal. Dan talked about how what we consider realistic has changed. Now that was fascinating. Like our sense of what's possible and what's real has completely altered in the last few months. And we've realized how dependent we are on each other. I really love the idea of a new settlement. I hope we can get to one, or at least something which kind of balances out some of the tensions in our lives and our societies that we struggle with individually, but also, you know, as groups and as individual, as a collective society. So that's a great, and it's quite exciting in a way if we can see the upside to it and the opportunity there. And I really liked, and it was a theme that emerged from Bruce as well, but that used the word space. So there's what's happened now is a new sense of, you said, political and conceptual space. New room for new thinking suddenly appears. And that space point, I think, was really a big part of what we talked about, Bruce. It's not just what we covered, but certainly that our relationship with space and working spaces is completely going to change. And I don't think I'd really thought through until now, Bruce, so thank you for that, kind of the ramifications of what's happening right now, not just on the financial side, of course, of businesses, but how a change in the way we go to work or the kind of work that we do will have such a fundamental reset on our working practices. And I love the fact that we're still using pre-COVID working behaviors in a sort of almost post-COVID reality already, or in a COVID reality already. You get it a lot, don't you? You get people trying to make, I remember from advertising industry, they make ads on the internet as if they're TV ads without realizing they're interactive, and that lasts for quite a few years. And I'm sure we'll see the same thing here, which is the hangover, I think you talked about, of emotions and habits that will kind of stick around. But I think it needs to change, because otherwise we're on a road to burnout, as you said. And I think we'd like to imagine we're not burning out now. My suspicion is actually getting worse. And it sounds like your server data suggests that was true, Bruce. So, but I could almost feel, Bruce, coming from you and from everyone, an underlying component, like an exciting opportunity to think ahead a little bit and at least to imagine something different. So maybe part of I guess what I might take away from it is, you know, what am I going to do with this new space? How am I going to use it? So anyway, I've rambled on long enough. That's probably more than enough time for you guys to beat the hell out of me with your brilliant killer recommended actions. So who'd like to go first of our lovely and wonderful guests this evening? Daniel, brilliant for volunteering. Thank you.
All right. Well, I mean, this is, as it's my last thing, I'm just going to be openly and completely nakedly political now. So, you know, here we go. I think, and so I want to just say something, and this is answering the question, but I want to say something about inequality. So I think that we've seen already in just the data that's coming out in relation to COVID, and we mentioned this in relation to climate change as well, that it's affecting different people differently. Okay, so we know that already BME rates of death are higher than they are for the rest of the population. I think it's very clear that when we get to the end of this, and when we account for geographical diversity and different living patterns and so forth, we'll find that it correlates with class, it correlates with social occupation, it correlates with, of course, things like obesity, which also correlates with class. And so I think we're going to find that this is very deeply impacting people who are poor, people who do badly out of the system as it is. And so I think that's what we're going to find. Now, I think that most people think there's something really deeply unjust about that, about the idea that your health differs according to where you're born, according to your social background. There's something that just tugs at our conscience about that in terms of the inequality of that. And so what I think we should do is to scrutinize that really carefully. I think that once the recovery comes, if the recovery comes, it's really important we don't just get carried away by how things are getting better. I think it's really important we look back and take note of that deep inequality and do something about it. So that's my recommendation. My recommendation is that we pay attention as we go forward.
Love it. Thank you. Anna or Bruce?
I can go. Right, I just want to leave you, this is one of my favourites at the moment. So when Ernest Hemingway was asked, how did you go bankrupt? His answer was, well, basically two ways, gradually and then suddenly, right? We are on the verge of collapse, my friends. I hate to tell you this. I know it's horrible news. To come back to Daniel's point, COVID is just the warm-up guy, okay? The stuff that's coming is much worse. But the things that are going to take us through are the things that we found strength in this crisis. So they're community, they're mutual aid, and they're looking at doing things differently. The problems that we have are a symptom of this tragedy of growth. I've put a document into the chat which has, with Winds of Change, I am showcasing, I am not advocating because I advocate citizens' assemblies to decide stuff, but what I am doing is showcasing you the wealth of visionary ideas that are out there that mean that we could live better, and also we could live, because the truth is, you might be having children now, your children are not going to reach your age, okay? Just think about that when you're selecting their schools. Think about that when you're paying for tutors. Think about their future, because they are not going to have the longevity that you have had so far. So just take that with you. Look at some of the best things that are around, because I don't want Extinction Rebellion to be all doom and gloom. The shit is coming, whether you like it or not. Try and find some good ways of getting out of it.
Thanks, Anna. Bruce?
Yeah, I think, I share your reflections, Leo, that, my instinct very resolutely was, I wonder how quickly we can go back to the way it was. And I think it's inevitable. It's one of those things that when we're going through the stages of grief, we go into sort of bargaining, denial, and we believe that the things that we've learnt about and the way that we've come through the system will return and will show some resilience. And I suspect that the sooner any of us realize the world has changed, the sooner we can adapt. So one of the questions was, I wonder what sort of leader will prevail in this world. Absolutely. What skills do you need to connect people when you're operating entirely through screens? Probably you need to exaggerate emotions. You need to connect one-to-one in authentic ways, probably on the phone or in other ways. And you need to just think more intentionally. What sort of teams are going to work? And I think that's what I'd say. The sooner that any of us, the penny can drop that the world has changed, the sooner that we can transition to the new world and be ready for it.
Amazing. I think that's a brilliant way to finish off. Thank you, Bruce. Everybody who's been present tonight, thank you so much for sticking with it and enjoying it and asking questions and chatting on the side. And I extend extreme thanks and appreciation to Anna Hyde from Extinction Rebellion, to Daniel Butt, Associate Professor at Oxford University, and Bruce Daisley, best-selling author. I'm looking forward to reading your next post. I think we have to share it out. We will follow up. There's a recording of this. We will write a summary by tomorrow morning, typically, and send it out to you all. And I'd just like to say, please stay in touch. I've really enjoyed this evening. I hope you did too. And stay positive, I think. Let that penny drop and let's do something positive. And on that note, I'll say good night and thank you very much. Cheers, guys.
Thank you.
It's
Cheers.
birthday dinner now, so I'm literally going to run away. There's people starving downstairs. I'll say goodbye. I'm coming, darling. I'll see you in a bit.